Once you've opened the book to another's life, the cover never looks the same. Alan Christopherson's diary. I woke with a start. I hadn't intended to fall asleep, but after 3 nights of sleeping on hard ground, I was out before I knew it. I looked at the clock and saw that it was almost 8:45. I groaned. Pamela. I went to the bathroom and washed my face and went outside and knocked on Pamela's door. She answered immediately. I wondered if you changed your mind. No, sorry, I fell asleep. Are you ready? She'd probably been waiting for several hours, but she only nodded. I'm ready. She stepped out, shutting the door behind her. Thank you. Wall Drug is not the single store it started as. It's now a long row of buildings that look like a cross between a strip mall and a movie studio's backlot western town. Wall Drug's restaurant was located near the middle of the complex. I held the door for Pamela as we walked into a large dining room separated into 2 eating areas by an open kitchen and a long row of cafeteria-style tray rails. The seating area close to the street had an ice cream bar and pastry counter with pies, brownies, and other confections, including a platter of their famous Free for Veterans cake donuts. The wood panel walls were hung with cowboy art, paintings of cowboys, horses, and Native Americans. They were all for sale, which is true of pretty much everything in the building. There was only one couple in the dining room. Pamela followed me over to a table in the southwest corner of the room, opposite the other diners. We can sit here, I said. What do you want to eat? Whatever you get is fine, Pamela replied. After looking over the hand-scrawled menu board, I ordered a couple of Cokes, 2 cups of chicken noodle soup, and French dip sandwiches. I paid for the meal and went back to the table where Pamela was sitting quietly. For a moment, we just looked at each other. Then I clasped my hands on the table in front of me. What do you want to talk about? Pamela took a deep breath. I'm not sure where to begin. After a moment, I said, why don't you begin by telling me why you abandoned your daughter? My words sounded harsher than I had intended. She nodded. All right. She looked down for a long time. When she looked back at me, her eyes had a dark sadness to them. I want you to understand something. What I'm going to tell you isn't an excuse. It's a reason. If I could do things differently, I would. She looked into my eyes to see if I understood. Okay, I said. She settled a little into her chair. I should start at the beginning. She took another deep breath. I was too young when I married Sam. I was only 18, way too young. My life at home was terrible, and I suppose I was just looking for a way to get out. My parents were always fighting. They were always screaming and shouting at each other. Sometimes their fights would turn violent. Once the neighbors called the police, but when they arrived, my parents just yelled at them. The police left shaking their heads. It was madness. Were they ever violent with you, I asked? My mother hit me a few times, but seeing them hurt each other was worse. I used to hide in my closet with my hands over my ears so I wouldn't hear them. But of course I heard every word. I always thought it was my fault. I know that's not rational, but children aren't terribly rational. This pattern went on my whole childhood. I don't know why they didn't get counseling or just leave each other. They were just sick, I guess. Or the relationship was. It was their cycle, but I never got used to it. When I was old enough, I got a job waitressing at a pancake house. I worked as much as I could, and when I wasn't working, I'd hang out with my friends. We'd stay out really late and I'd sleep over at their houses. For months, I barely went home. I hadn't really run away from home. I just stopped going there. The first time I went home after I'd been away for more than a week, I thought my parents would be upset and worried about me. But it was more like I'd never been gone. My father wasn't there, and my mom didn't even ask where I'd been. Once I graduated from high school, I stopped going home at all. I spent most of my time with one of the other waitresses at the restaurant. Her name was Claire. She was a friend from school and had helped me get the job in the first place. We'd work until closing, then we'd go out to parties, then sleep at her place. Eventually, I just moved in with her. That's where I met Sam. He was Claire's cousin. Sam was a lot older than me, 8 years older. She shook her head. He's only 26, but he seemed so old back then. I guess compared to me, he was. I'd only known him a few weeks when he asked me out. He was different than the other boys I've been hanging out. They were still kids. Sam was older, more mature. On our 3rd date, he asked me to marry him. I said yes. I wasn't sure if it was right, but it's like they say, a drowning person isn't picky about which lifeboat she climbs into. I wasn't really sure about anything at the time except that I liked him. And if I was going to get married, I thought that marrying someone older would be safer.